Hello and welcome back to Learn Node.js on Codecademy. We're in the Introduction to Node.js section. This is the Util module. Developers sometimes classify outlier functions used to maintain code and debug certain aspects of a program's functionality as utility functions. Utility functions don't necessarily create new functionality in a program, but you can think of them as internal tools used to maintain and debug your code. The Node.js Util core module contains methods specifically designed for these purposes. The Util module can be required into the file using const util is assigned require util. So this will give us access to that module and we'll access it using our variable here util. Once required, we'll have access to many useful objects and methods within the util module. One important object is types, which provide methods for runtime type checking in Node. Const util is assigned require util. Const today is assigned new date. Const earth day is assigned April 22nd, 2022. This is a string. Here we console log, and we're checking here with util types is date, and this should return true because that would return a date object, and this one, util types is date earth day, would return false because it is a string. In the above example, we first require in the util module, next we declare two variables. Today stores today's date as an instance of the date object, and earth day stores the date of earth day as a string. We then log the result of type checking each variable using util types is date. The types.isDate method checks for date objects and returns a Boolean value giving us true, false. Since today is a date object, it returns true, and since earth day is a string, it returns false. Another important util method is .promisify, which turns callback functions into promises. As you know, asynchronous programming is essential to Node.js. In the beginning, this asynchrony was achieved using error-first callback functions, which are still very prevalent in the Node ecosystem today, but since promises are often preferred over callbacks and especially nested callbacks, Node offers a way to turn these into promises. Let's take a look. Here we have function getUser, takes in an ID and callback. What it does is when it's called, it will return this setTimeout function, which runs after 1 second. And what does it do? It checks if ID is equal to 5. If so, then it calls callback, passes in null and this object nicknamed Teddy. Else, if ID is not 5, it calls this new error, user not found. Here's our callback function, which when it's called here, null is passed into error and this object is passed into user. If error, then we're going to exit out of there. We're going to console.error an error message and exit of the process. If it's not an error, this never runs, and we will console log user found, their nickname is, and we access nickname using user.nickname, and user.nickname would be that .nickname, which gives us Teddy, since it is that second argument. Callback, second argument, user.nickname, Teddy. So when we do get user with 1 passed in, we do get user not found. When we do get user with 5 passed in, we get that console log, user found, their nickname's Teddy. Here we have a function that queries a database for a specified user ID. GetUser methods are very common in backend applications, and most will also support error-first callbacks since a database query typically takes longer to run than other operations. We simulate the query with a setTimeout method that executes a callback function after 1000 milliseconds or 1 second. If the user with the specified ID is found, the callback function is executed with null passed in as the argument for the error parameter, and an object containing the returned user information is passed in as an argument for the user parameter. If the user is not found, the callback function is executed, passing in a new error as the argument for the error parameter. A second argument for the user is not necessary since the function will end in the case of an error. This way of handling this function may seem a bit convoluted these days, but with .promisify we can easily change it into a modern, cleaner, and more maintainable version of itself. Here is that version. Const get user promise is assigned this util.promisify get user. Here when we call get user promise, we pass in an ID, and it either will do this then or it will catch the error. Down here we pass in the 1, we'd get user not found, and if we did get user with 5 passed in, we would get user found. So this is a little oversimplified. We declare a getUserPromise variable that stores the getUser method turned into a promise using the .promisify method. With that in place, we're able to use getUserPromise with .then and .catch methods, or we could use the async await syntax here to resolve the promise returned or catch any errors. Now, this is an extremely simplified example, but it's helpful to recognize how to use this important tool when you start working with more complex callback functions. Our instructions say, in app.js, we've required in an object containing long distance hiking trails in the US. You can view that object by opening the trails.js file from the navigator. Below that is a callback function, getTrailDistance, that's ready to be converted using util.promisify. Start by requiring the util module at the top of the app.js and saving it to the util variable. So let's zoom out a little. First, we could take a look like it says to that trails.js because it is being required here. So let's see what that is. If we go in here, we see trails.js and we see it exports this trails object. And what we see in the trails object is the trails, the nickname, the miles, the kilometers, the region. This is exported, and when we go to app.js, we have access to it using trails. So the first thing we want to do is require the util module at the top of the app and saving it to a util variable. So first let's exit here. Then here we do, okay, well that should be good. Run that. We do pass so far. Okay, let's do 2. Next, below the callback function, call at the bottom of the file using const declare a variable getTrailDistance promise and store util.promisify getTrailDistance. So that would be here at the bottom. We would do, okay, we should be able to hit run. Alright, so we did that. Now 3, then call a new promisified function getTrailDistancePromise with north country or any trail property from the trails object in trails.js as the only argument. Resolve the promise with a .then method and reject the promise with a .catch method. Let's do that here. Run that. We do pass 3. Lastly, inside of then, log to the console. The nickname is mi miles long, where nickname is a nickname and mi is the distance of the passed in trail. Inside catch, pass in a function that logs any errors. Okay, let's do that. So in .then, they want us to log this here. So let's copy that and let's add that here. When we run getTrailDistancePromise, we go in here and it does this promisify getTrailDistance. So once we have getTrailDistance, we go in here, which is gonna have north country and a callback. The callback has 2 arguments, error and trail data. If there's an error, we exit out of everything and throw out our error message. Else, we have this mi, which is traildata.miles, nickname, traildata.nickname, and we console log the nickname is mi miles long, and we're able to grab that data. So we want to do something similar in ours. So when we get that value back, we could call it something like trail found, and we could look at the object it returns, and we should have nickname and miles within it. If so, we can save nickname and miles and do something similar to what they did here and do something like this. Then we could paste in the console log and use those values, and we could do that like this. And this will grab nickname if it exists for north country. It should grab the nickname and the miles if north country exists. If we put in something else, it would throw an error. We also need to make sure that inside catch, pass in a function that logs any errors. So here, we're going to pass in error which is going to also just console out error. So with that, let's run it and see what happens. So we did do something wrong. Found trail found. So I think if we switch this here, I think that might fix it. Let's run that. Still saying it's wrong. So let's check here. Make sure these are the same. If we go over here to trails, so it should be miles. Maybe that one. Run. Oh, and now that's working. Okay, so it was looking for .mi in our trails and it didn't exist. Okay, once we changed it to the correct key, we were able to access it and pass the lesson. Okay, so what are we learning in this lesson? Well, we're learning about the Util module. The Util module has different utility functions that we can use and are helpful to maintain and debug our code. We have to require it in order to use it. And in this lesson, we found out about checking isDate. We found out about using types, which provide methods for runtime type checking. We were able to use the isDate method to check if we have a date object or not. We also learned that the Util module helps us with Promisify, which turns callback functions into promises. In the past, callback functions were preferred to achieve asynchrony. Today, promises are preferred, especially because they're better than nesting callbacks. We learned that Node is able to turn these into much simpler code using promises, which, as you can see here, cuts it in about half. As long as you're understanding those concepts, you are understanding this lesson, and I'll see you in the next one.